Thank you for the chance to speak. Thank you to Paul and to Sylvia and to others who have been part not only of the conversation over this conference duration, but well before that, and I hope far into the future. Today I want to speak briefly about social infrastructure, about the aspects of community around us that are sometimes less visible than the concrete and steel and other things that we see. Canada has a projected $120-odd billion physical infrastructure deficit. Has anybody not heard that? No, it's okay, maybe a few, but we hear that a lot. One of the things I'm challenged by is the question of what is the state of Canada's social infrastructure? So if it's a concern to us that our water pipes or our sewage lines or our transportation links are falling apart, how are we doing in terms of the connectivity, the institutional landscape, and the state of our cities in terms of the human factor, the sense of belonging and connectedness? There are some statistics that would suggest to us that human social isolation is actually increasing, not decreasing in our country. That's not exactly what we're aiming for. That's a sign of something going on with our social infrastructure that we must pay attention to. I have run in 3 municipal campaigns and succeeded once. If by being successful you must be elected, but if you take the Abraham Lincoln model, I think I've got 6 or 7 failures left before I really accomplish what I need to from an elected standpoint. One of the things that motivated me to be involved, this was one of the failings, by the way, Friesen for mayor, did not work out. Friesen as councillor worked earlier, and then mayor didn't work. But it was a great opportunity, and I would encourage you to consider it if you haven't, a chance to go door to door and to hear from people what the issues are in the community. So it's just an example of something for myself that I have invested in terms of trying to understand what's happening in communities. My core idea this afternoon is not new. It is that we must work hard to ensure that alongside all the other aspirations we have for sustainability, that we also consider our social sustainability. In fact, I think that we won't achieve our environmental or economic or even our physical infrastructure goals if we don't attend to the social infrastructure questions. I don't think it's an add-on. I don't think it's a feature ad. I don't think it's one more thing to think about. I actually think it is deeply central and will in a great sense determine the future of our communities and cities. If we want to talk about sustainability and we only talk about the environment, it won't work. If we want sustainability and we only talk about our streets and roads and the physical aspects around us, it will not be sufficient. Now, we need those things. We must go after those things. I am fully in support of Canada's social or its physical infrastructure deficit being addressed by federal funding and other creative means. We must attend to that. If we don't, things will get rather alarming for us as things fall apart and bridges fall down and other things like that happen. It's really critical, but we must attend to the social. This is what most of us want. We do not want to be socially isolated. We do not want to be alone. We do not want to be disconnected. All of us want to have this, to be with people that look like they enjoy each other's company, that they're having a good time, that we belong. All of us are hunting for that. So are the people that we are working with and among in our communities. All of us want that because social infrastructure and connectedness and belonging have always been central to great cities and great communities and great neighborhoods. Whether we're talking today in 2015 or whether we go back 1,000 years, we still need that. And if we project ahead in another 100 years, however advanced our digital connections might be, you and I will still need other people. That will not change. And our ability to facilitate that is going to be a critical part of the creative energy that we bring as community leaders to our work, whether that's in an elected capacity, whether that's in the capacity of people volunteering in our communities, or whether we have senior governmental roles. We must attend to these things if we're going to do better than we have to date. Another important factor is that the spaces around us matter. People need places, and places influence people. So some places that we make are fantastic for people. They're places that people love. Other places we make are fantastic for birds, or they're fantastic for squirrels, or they're fantastic for, I don't know, sunlight and wind and dust, but they're not great for people. When we design our physical spaces, and as we continue to reinvest in that infrastructure deficit that we have, it is critical that that is paired with the social infrastructure questions. because to simply rebuild what we have and not improve the social utility of it will be a great failing on our part. Now, we often see these two things as somehow separate. Are we going to look after the social side or the physical side? And for us today, I don't think I would get a lot of argument to say that the social infrastructure question is important. But I think what's critical is that we, as people who are interested in the state of our neighborhoods, think about how we can pair that interest alongside the other needs that we have. We know some urban forms are not great for social interactivity. Maybe we shouldn't stop building them that way. We know some spaces are great for cars, they're great for other activities, but they are not so good for human interaction. Let's minimize the downside to human interaction and increase its ability to connect us socially as much as possible. In other words, our physical infrastructure is going to have to do more than it does now. It's not enough for it to do one function. It has to serve in connecting us with other people. I had a chance to tour Sulphur Springs, Texas, not too long ago, about a month ago. And in Sulphur Springs, Texas, in 2008, I am told by the town manager that if you visited, you would conclude that their main street was either dead or dying. It was hard to tell which. But it was certainly not a place that people sought out. 2015, we toured with the town manager, with Mark. He's the guy that's there with the red tie and shirt. Mark showed us around, and it's a beautiful Main Street area. In fact, he said to us, he said, I knew we were on the right track when somebody requested that they could have a wedding on our Main Street, in our town square. He goes, that would never have happened in 2008. So what's the difference? What happened in those 7 years? Well, Mark and the council, piece by painful piece, began to think about how they could make their core area good for humans, good for people. How could this be a place that people would actually seek out? So they physically designed and worked with what was there to make it more amenable for human interactivity. Now, if you go to Sulphur Springs, Texas, I'm told during the summer, every weekend, there's often things planned and programmed, from car shows to weddings to all kinds of activities for the community. It has become a hub. In fact, he said, one of the telling moments, he said, for me was when people would come up to me and say, I haven't seen so-and-so for years, and we sat and talked or stood and talked for an hour. We met together in these spaces. That didn't happen before. It was simply a place that got you from A to B. It was not a place where you would belong or connect or feel welcome. So place matters. Our physical infrastructure has a great impact on the social side of our lives together. Now, does anybody know what this is? This is a water main failure, a really, really big water main failure down in the US. When our physical infrastructure fails, these are the kinds of things we see. Chunks of bridges fall on us or collapse entirely. Potholes form in the roads, the power goes out, our sewers back up. There are many signs when physical infrastructure fails. This is one of them. My question to you as community organizers and leaders and people who are thinking about this is, what are the signs of social infrastructure failure? How do we know when it's under stress? How do we know when it's reaching its limits? And what could we do to change it? We're here to try to learn some of the ways that we might change the landscape of our cities, particularly the social landscape. We don't want these kinds of ruptures. We see it in certain increases in mental health issues. Social isolation generates a number of rather negative outcomes for us as humans. Social isolation doesn't mean that we're just alone once in a while. Just because you like to read a book by yourself and get away from irritating people, I totally get that. I'm with you on that. That's not social isolation. Social isolation is chronic loneliness. It is people who are so disconnected from other people, sometimes by their own actions, but sometimes simply by the structures they're part of, that they die prematurely. There's a study by Holt and Lundstad, came out in 2010, and its findings were rather alarming. Socially isolated adults will die at about the same rate as if you smoked 15 cigarettes a day or suffered from heart disease. So it is not a soft issue. It is not a minor thing. We die sooner. We do far less well physically if we are not connected to other human beings, even introverts. It's not about personality, it's about belonging, connectedness, and how that happens in our communities. If we don't adjust this, we will continue to see many of the same problems that we're trying to treat in other ways with the scenario of the ambulance at the bottom of the cliff, rather than working hard to put those fences at the top of the cliff. You've been reminded of that many times during the course even of these few hours that we've been together in the last day and a half. It's very critical that we attend to those kinds of signs that our social infrastructure may in fact be under duress. Here's the tricky part though with social infrastructure. If I asked you, what is the relationship between these two people? What would you say? Married. Married at least 5 years. Yeah. The answer is, I have no idea. This is just a photograph, but the truth is, you can try to infer things, but you cannot see a relationship between two people in some sort of physical, tangible way. Now you can see the results of it, you can see it in action, you can infer things, but the ties between people are largely invisible. The ties that connect us to our water treatment facility aren't invisible, except that they may be hidden underground, but there's a physicality to them. The social ties among us are much more difficult to see, and in some sense, because we can't see our social infrastructure as clearly, it's easier to neglect it, it's easier to assume it's just going to work, it's easier to assume that it's going to simply happen when it needs to happen. But the truth is, it's often hard to see, hard to detect, and we need our best thinking and our best efforts in our communities to try to show and see and understand what's going on with our social infrastructure. This is not what we want. This is a human being disconnected, or at least an image of someone disconnected. This is not community. This is not belonging. This is not things working well. This is a sign of failure, of things not happening as they should. The decisions we make about our physical infrastructure and the things we invest in as communities will have an effect on our social life together. It'll have an effect on our institutions, our organizations, and on ourselves. Whatever we want it to do, if we don't think carefully about it, it may have unintended consequences for us. This guy was a technical grad of MIT's PhD program, really bright guy, really keen, very interested in energy issues and how he could solve the energy problems of the future using a shiny new MIT PhD. He got a MacArthur Genius Foundation grant. Maybe a few of you have had those, I don't know, but apparently they're hard to get. I haven't met anyone that's had one. He said when he came out of graduate school, he said, I felt that the problems of our ecological situation and our energy crisis were technological. That if we were smart enough and inventive enough, that we would be able to solve the problems. A number of years into pursuing that line, and this was in a New York Times article that was done about him, Saul Griffith said, I have now come to the point where I realize that the problems and challenges we are facing are primarily human. That the technological solutions we hope for will never be enough if we don't get the people side right. He learned the lesson that if you make energy cheap, we just use more of it. If you make something convenient, we don't use less of it, we tend to find new ways to use it and become more wasteful. So he said, what I learned was that I had to start thinking about how on earth then do you change these odd things called people. As an MIT technical grad, I'm used to dealing with the things and the atoms in the universe and all of the mathematical applications we might make. But now there's this awkward entity called humans and culture, and how are we supposed to change that? He was bumping into the social infrastructure, the connections and ties and institutions and organizations that constitute our lives together. You and I are up against similar challenges. We have before us opportunities in our communities to rethink what we're doing. We have opportunities to reweave some of that social fabric that has been torn apart, has been thinned, and has been changed. Our work is to try to alleviate the social poverty that is around us. You would have to look hard and perhaps would never find a group of people who have been as materially well off as we are today. In terms of the number, the health benefits we have received, the fact that we don't have to suffer and die from waterborne diseases at the same rates that we used to 200 years ago, even in the city of Hamilton. Go back far enough before we had good water, and there was all sorts of issues with that. We don't worry about that the same way anymore. But with all our advancement in material goods and benefits, we are seeing a kind of creeping sense that the social poverty and its effects on all of us which does not respect your age. It does not respect your income level. You are in fact probably more prone to be socially isolated if you're wealthy or if you're very poor. There are all of these factors that play into the well-being of our communities and to which we must attend. It is our hope as we continue to gather and meet and talk that together we will find ways to restitch that fabric together, that we will not let the physical infrastructure and the social infrastructure be separated, but see that we need both, and we need them to be held together, and we need them to be attended to if we're going to flourish. Thank you.